Hello there, my name is Terry with Tree Marie Soapworks. Today I'm sharing with you my testing of natural colorants. We will talk a little bit about how I came up with the sample size and my formula, and a little bit about usage rates and acceleration and color fading. I'm sure you want to know which natural colorant made each of these beautiful samples. At the end of the video, I will reveal the results and the colorants which made the results, so that when you're picking out colorants for your natural soaps, you'll have an idea of where to begin. So stick with me and let's get started. First, let's talk about my sample size. The reason I am making bigger samples than I normally do is because the particle size with natural colorants is bigger than the particle size of micas, neons, ultramarines, and oxides. It's very difficult for that bigger particle size to be measured in the smaller size that I normally do my samples. And also, I want to test mine in a little bit bigger amount per pound of oils. I want to use 3 teaspoons per pound of oils. Next, I need to decide what teaspoon amount of natural colorant I want to use that is not too small to measure. And from there, I can do the math and figure out what size my sample size should be, or at least how much oils my sample size should be, and then I can generate my recipe. I've decided I'm going to use 1/4 teaspoon for my testing. I need to figure out what my test size of oils is going to be since I'm testing per pound of oils. So I said earlier I'm going to use 3 teaspoons per pound of oils. 1 pound is equal to 16 ounces, and I always, instead of using 1 pound, I say 16 ounces because then my result will be in ounces. Okay, so 3 teaspoons over 16 ounces. And then I set that equal to 1/4 teaspoon over X number of ounces. Next, I cross multiply and divide. So I take 16 times 0.25 and I get an answer of 4. Then to solve for x, I divide by 3 and I get an answer of 1.3 repeating. Okay, so now we've figured out our proportion, and we know that the amount of oils we need to get that usage rate of 3 teaspoons per pound of oils is 1/4 teaspoon to 1.3 ounces of oils. Now that we figured out that we need 1.3 ounces of oils, we need to figure out how many cavities we need to fill. I got my mold at Elements Bath & Body. I'm at their website right now, and to find this mold I type in oval mold. Hit enter, and it's the oval 2.75-inch silicone mold. It has 15 cavities, and the cavities have a capacity of 1.7 ounces. Now that you know the weight of oils that you need for one sample, you would just take that times 15 to get your batch oil weight. But in my case, I like to have a little extra because you have soap normally that sticks to the side of the bowl or the spatula or the squeeze bottle. I want to account for that so I don't have a short sample that's my last sample. So I'm going to take that 1.3 times 15.5 to have a little extra. Okay, so now it's time to put in the recipe in Soapcalc. Here I am at soapcalc.net, and to put a recipe in, I go to Recipe Calculator. I have a recipe already saved that I'm going to use, so I go to Recipe 3 and hit Load Recipe. Now I have all my ingredients as far as oils and butters entered in and the percentages, but I need to change a few things above. We just figured out the weight of the oils that we need by taking that 1.3 times 15.5, and we got 20.15, so we enter that here in the weight of the oils. And I make sure I have ounces selected. Next we go to the water, and Soapcalc's default is for hot process soap, and that's way too much for cold process soap. I use 25, and that figures your water at 25% of your oil weight. If you would rather figure your water by lye concentration, I use 35% for that. And if you like to figure it as a ratio of water to lye, I use a 1.8 to 1 ratio for that. I'm going to keep my superfat at 7, and here we have our recipe. I'm going to hit Calculate Recipe and View or Print Recipe. Okay, now we have our recipe. I'm going to call it Natural Colorant Samples. So here we have that 20.15 oil weight, and then here's our batch weight. And in addition, you have any weight of any additives you add. I'm going to add sodium lactate. I do that because it creates a harder bar, and it also makes the soap release from the mold easier. For that, I'm using a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. That's an easy number to find because you have pounds already calculated for you, so you just use that same number, 1.25 teaspoons. And then this is sodium lactate. And then I always notate what rate I use. So I used it at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Another thing I would notate on my recipe is that I'm using 1/4 of a teaspoon for my sample size, and I would note that I'm using that at 3 teaspoons per pound of oils. I would also notate that I'm going to be dividing my batch weight by 15.5. I would also remember to note the weight of my bowl so that I can subtract out the bowl and get my batch weight. Next, I print my recipe and we're ready to make soap. I'm getting started making the batter. You've seen me do this many times, so I will go through this rather quickly. I'm assuming you know how to make soap if you're doing some testing. First, I start with the water. I use 1/3 to 1/2 of the water weight in distilled water ice cubes, and then I top off the remaining water weight with distilled water. Next, I measure the sodium hydroxide, of course, following all the safety precautions. Next, I add the sodium hydroxide to the cold water and I stir it right away and make sure that there's no sodium hydroxide that gets caked on the bottom because that's rather hard to dissolve afterwards. So stir it right away, even if you don't get all of it out of the container, stir it, and then add the remaining sodium hydroxide that you weighed out. Next, we have the sodium lactate, and remember when we were figuring out the recipe, we did it at 1 teaspoon per pound of oils, and remember the amount was 1 1/4 teaspoon. Next, we start with our coconut oil, and notice that I had a pencil there. I recorded the weight of my bowl so that I could figure out my batter weight later. Next, I melt the coconut oil in the microwave. I use only 30-second bursts when I'm dealing with this small of an amount, and I would go down to 15 seconds as it gets closer to being done. Sometimes I use the defrost setting on my microwave and I set it to the lowest setting, and that way I can go do some other things and it gently melts your oils without getting them too warm. Next, as you see here, I'm measuring the avocado oil and then the castor oil and then finally the olive oil. Now that the coconut oil is melted, I measure in the shea butter. I don't like to get the temperature of the shea butter up very high, so I try and melt it by the residual heat of the coconut oil, but if I can't, I will microwave it very gently. Next, I add the cocoa butter pastilles. They are what I treat the most delicately because they don't like to be at high temperatures. Sometimes that can cause things while your soap is curing. You can get fat bloom. So I like to keep my cocoa butter temperatures pretty low. Okay, here I'm measuring those 1/4 of a teaspoon measurements, and I have 3 rows of 5, and so for this first round of 15, I'll let you know what colors I used. I think they're so beautiful in their powder state. One note, if I don't mention where they're from Brambleberry. I did use a lot of colors from Brambleberry in this first round. Okay, the first color is Rose Clay. Then we have Paprika from the grocery store. Then we have Turmeric from the grocery store. Next, we have Olive Leaf Oil from Wholesale Supplies Plus. Then we have Indigo. Next row, we have Alkanet. Then we have Cocoa Powder from the grocery store. Next, we have Madder. Then we have Spirulina. And then the last one in that second row, we have Spinach Powder. The final row, we have, for the first one, Rosehip Powder. That's from Wholesale Supplies Plus. And then we have Yellow Brazilian Clay. Next, we have Dark Red Brazilian Clay. And then Tomato Powder. And that was the second to the last one. That's really difficult to mix. There's some really hard clumps in that. Okay, the final one is Bee Pollen. I don't know if you noticed, but I used a glass sheet to measure my colors onto, and then I'm using olive oil to disperse the colorant into, and I'm mixing them so everything is incorporated really well. I use a palette knife to mix my colorants, but you could use whatever method works for you. For the second one, I really could have used a mortar and pestle to break up the clumps. There were some really hard ones. I really wouldn't even recommend tomato paste. It didn't really lend that much color to the sample anyway. Okay, I'm going to speed this up to 20 times speed, and I'll join you back when we're making soap. Now I add the liquid oils to the melted hard oils. Next, I add the sodium lactate to the cooled lye solution, and I strain that into the oil mixture. Next, I weigh the bowl and the contents, and then I subtract the weight of the bowl that I recorded earlier, and I have the weight of the contents. From there, I take that weight and divide it by 15.5, and that will be the weight that I use for my individual sample weights. Here I started stick blending, but I realized I didn't have my squeeze bottle prepared, and I always use a liner, so here I'm adding the liner and making sure it's ready. I use a squeeze bottle when I'm making test batches because the squeeze bottle makes it so much faster to do my measurements and so much more accurate. If you're interested, I have a video on squeeze bottles that I talk about the liner and I talk about how to make an extension, and that comes in really handy for some different techniques. It's worth taking some time and watching it. Next, it's time to fill up my little cups. I'm just using disposable 3-ounce cups, and I'm filling them up with the amount that I worked out earlier. And in this case, my amount was close to 52 to 53 grams, right around there. All right, we need to do 15 of these total, so let's get started. Next, all I do is add the colorant to the cups, and then once that's done, I will be mixing them and getting them to trace. I want to make any notes on any acceleration that happens whenever you're testing, whether it's fragrances or whether it's colorants. Make any notes that could help you in the future. For this round of testing, I noticed that the turmeric and the indigo did cause a little acceleration. At this point, I use my cordless mini mixer, and I get these to almost medium trace. Just want to make sure they're definitely traced. Now it's time to fill a mold. Make sure that you put them in the mold in the right order that you have written down somewhere so that you have kind of a map of what samples are which, because it's really easy to get them mixed up. A lot of them look very similar to each other. You see me move in the mold a little after each time I pour. I'm wiggling it a little bit to get that to settle down into that groove that's around the edge. I want you to pay attention and see if you can pick out the two that accelerate. It's pretty easy to tell. Pay attention to the pour right after I take the cup away. You can see which ones mound up. Did you catch that? It was the third to the last one and the last one that were the ones that accelerated, and that was the indigo and turmeric. Now that I have everything in the mold, I bang down the mold one more time, then I cover it and I put it in the oven and do the oven processing like I normally would. That means that I turn the oven on a little bit and let it preheat. I preheat it to the lowest setting. In my case, it's 170 degrees Fahrenheit. I put the soap in the oven and I turn the oven off and I turn the oven light on. And then when I go to bed, I turn off the oven light and I let the soap come to room temperature naturally in the oven, and I take it out in the morning. Here we are the next day. I'm removing the soap from the mold. As you can see, the bottoms look rather bad. They're not level. It was because of the wax paper. Looking back, I probably could have covered it with something that wouldn't have touched the top, like maybe a slab mold that I have, like a silicone mold. Just turn it upside down and cover them, and that would keep the heat in there. That's what I would do next time. But I did plane these. I didn't show that, but I planed them off so that I can mark them with my stylus, as you see here. I put 3x on all of these to note that I tested them at 3 teaspoons per pound of oils, and I did the abbreviated name of these just so I know which samples are which. When I tested a whole nother set, so I have 15 more samples here, and I will go over the names of these in a little bit. I tested these at 3 teaspoons per pound of oils, but that doesn't mean that they should be used at 3 teaspoons per pound of oil. I wanted to see the intensity of the color, and sometimes when I just test at 1 teaspoon per pound of oils, it's really light. Here I can dial it back if I want to. For example, for the activated charcoal, I already know that I use that at basically 2 teaspoons per pound of oils. I always use per pound of soap, and I use 1.5 teaspoons per pound of soap. I would not use that at 3 teaspoons per pound of oils. It would probably color the lather. If you see some of these are pretty intense, those ones I probably dial back a little bit. It's really hard to find guidelines on many of these colorants because they're natural and they're okay for skin at whatever rate, really. But do your own research and see what you can find out on the color that you're using. Keep in mind that anything that's not saponifiable in your soap will decrease the longevity of the bar. The more plant matter you have, the less longevity of the bar you will have. Okay, now let's get started with the results. First we have purple kaolin clay, and I got that at Elements Bath & Body. Keep in mind I shot this video 3 years ago. Some of these colorants might not be available from the same supplier, but you should be able to find it elsewhere. Next we have red sandalwood powder from Brambleberry. After that we have alkanet root powder from Brambleberry. Then we have activated charcoal, also called smooth coconut carbon. I got that at Elements Bath & Body. After that we have natural indigo powder from Brambleberry. Then we have spirulina powder from Brambleberry. After that we have spinach powder from Brambleberry. Then we have bee pollen from Brambleberry. After that, alfalfa, also from Brambleberry. Here we have green zeolite clay, and I got that at Wholesale Supplies Plus. This sample is a little more exfoliating than any of the other ones. Next row we have nettle leaves, and I got those at Brambleberry. I did have to pulverize them because they're just dried leaves. After that, we have olive leaf powder, and I got that at Wholesale Supplies Plus. Next, we have yarrow flower powder, and that was from Brambleberry. After that, we have kelp powder from Brambleberry. That was a little stinky. Next, we have cranberry fiber powder. I got that at Majestic Mountain Sage. After that, we have rose clay, and that is from Brambleberry. This is called dark red Brazilian clay, and it's from Elements Bath & Body. Then we have madder root, and that is from Brambleberry. After that we have rose hip powder, and that is from Wholesale Supplies Plus. Next is cocoa powder, and that's just from the grocery store. For the last row, we have paprika, which is just from the grocery store. Then turmeric, which is also from the grocery store. Then we have yellow Brazilian clay from Brambleberry. After that we have orange peel, and that is from Brambleberry. You can also get that at the grocery store, but you need to pulverize it a little more. The tomato powder is from Brambleberry. That's the one that I didn't recommend. This is calendula petals. This is from homegrown calendula. You can get it at other places, but often the color is much more muted than homegrown. This is cornflower from Brambleberry. When it's dried, it's a really vibrant bright blue, but in soap it looks like this. Next we have pumpkin powder from Brambleberry. That didn't really change the color of soap. It's pretty much the same color as the control sample. Finally, we have zinc oxide. That can be argued whether it's natural or not, but I wanted to test it anyway, and it did lend a nice white color to the soap. And that's from Brambleberry. Another thing I want to talk to you about is color fading in natural colorants. There's always exceptions, but mostly natural colorants will fade away faster, and especially if they're exposed to sunlight. So keep that in mind if you're doing outdoor vending and you have your products in the sunlight. One of the exceptions to that rule is clay. That stays very true. I mentioned earlier that I shot this video 3 years ago and I'm finally getting to the editing, but I want to show you the difference. My samples have been in my office and they haven't gotten much sun but a little. So let's look at these samples and see how they changed over 3 years. That will give you an idea of how they would fade in the sunlight. Here we are with the first set of samples, and now here we are with the second set of samples. That's a pretty big change, isn't it? Let's check that out again. You can see that the ones that stayed true were the clays and also the activated charcoal. That's all I have for you today. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope to see you back here next time. Have a wonderful day.